Okay, thank you. Chair of the Portfolio Committee, Ms. Joan Phapps, Department of Trade and Industry, Freedom of Expression Institute, Google, and everybody who has been involved in the organizing of these round tables. We finally have a round table discussion with round tables. So, and all the stakeholders will be making input. I've seen various leaders in the different sectors that are involved with within the creative industry. Thank you very much. It's a great honor for me to be part of this and privileged to officially give an opening address on what I think are the two of the most important pieces of legislation that are currently before Ms. Phapps and her portfolio committee. In fact, we're just talking about that we actually need to fast track the process with some of the pieces of legislation so that we get that concluded. I have been asked by the President to chair the task team, as indicated, on the creative industries. And the task team was established after the President had an engagement with artists. And the rationale behind the task team is that a lot of the issues which the artists raised were covered by a whole range of government departments and ministries. And that in order to coordinate that work, the presidency through the deputy minister in the presidency would then chair a task team of deputy ministers, which includes trade and industry, communications, police. We invite economic development and labor to be part of that task team. It also includes treasury. And the idea is for us to look at the issues that affects activists, workers, practitioners within the creative industry. And I always hear people saying that the task team was set up because many artists died as paupers or died poor. But I think the sole purpose is to ensure that we do not bury artists as poor, but the sole purpose is to ensure that we have artists living with dignity and earning, rightly so, from their work, and that their work is or does not unduly benefit other people, whereas they do not benefit from their work. So the rationale for embarking on the copyright law reform was essentially the plight of the creative industry, and in particular the music industry. And therefore this is part of the broader engagements that have been happening and actually culminate in from a very long process of engagement with practitioners and activists within the industry. And therefore the copyright and related rights legislation in South Africa is outdated and we believe does not provide for enough exceptions and limitations under the copyright regime, and therefore severely impacting core industries relating not only to the arts, but those who have disabilities and learning challenges, access to education, information, and knowledge. Now, the role of government is obviously to create an enabling environment for stakeholders to actively participate in the economy and contribute through innovation and creativity to the knowledge economy. This is a delicate balancing act which requires the amendment of the legislation in order to shift the balance of power and afford legal rights to those who for far too long have been and remain disadvantaged. As tools of public policy, intellectual property rights, including copyright, is not an absolute right, but is limited in terms of exceptions and limitations allowed under the multilateral regime. Now, the universal purpose of copyright is to reward and incentivize creators of knowledge and art. The balance is intended to work in a positive and constructive manner so that the copyright system in its entirety can achieve its policy objectives of promoting innovation and creativity while allowing for dissemination and adaptation of creative works and new technologies. And the public, therefore, as a whole, we hold that responsibility to ensure that they benefit. Various sectors within the South African copyright regime are obviously dissatisfied, but some are actually excited with these developments. Ranking highest are the local performers and composers who have not benefited due to the lack of access to the copyright system. The amendment to the legislation has occurred after a long history spanning from 2002 amendment, the 2009 meeting of the President with the creative industry, the release of the 2011 Copyright Review Commission, and the establishment of the Presidential Task Team on Creative Industry, which I explained what its purpose was. In 2 years into succession, in 2016-17 and 2017-18, the President has prioritized this reform in his budget speech. And furthermore, the practical problem experienced by educators, researchers, and libraries under the current law calls for a revision which enhances access to and use of copyright works and to enhance access to information for the betterment of education and research for a better South Africa. We may differ obviously on semantics, but we would like to see the implementation of the reform copyright regime to be precise and to see it benefiting everybody in the value chain. The amendment to the legislation has not come without criticism. Technology is obviously continuously evolving and users are becoming creators because of digital platforms like YouTube. Information is accessible and readily available through smartphones, tablets, etc. due to search engines like Google, one of our partners here. Copyright is becoming interactive. Therefore, through the Department of Trade and Industry, Google South Africa and the freedom of expression, we are here to engage with all of these issues. The copyright and performance protection bills are formally before Parliament, and public hearings on both bills are scheduled to take place in the near future. This will be a transparent process, and Parliament will obviously engage and allow all stakeholders, Ms. Fabs, to ensure that they engage with the bill. And I'd like to encourage everyone to also contribute into that legislative process. The challenges facing the copyright regime are wide and not limited to one specific sector, but can be summarized as the current outdated one is marred with issues that poses questions of access, to education, access to knowledge, and sadly the exploitation of artists due to lack of royalty payments to those artists. And I think this is one of the key issues that you will obviously be hearing on today, the exploitation of artists and the payment of royalties to artists as the ultimate owners of their work. The Performance Protection Act of 1967 does not afford moral rights to audiovisual performers. The creative industry has become known for the unfair contracts resulting in the perpetual signing away of the economic rights which was established by the Copyright Review Commission and the lack of updated industry contracts for freelance performers. And as a task team, we have done our best in ensuring that most of the broadcasters enter into contracts with performers and with artists, which would ultimately also benefit the artists. And we hope that this progress will not, or rather there will not be any regress with regards to the work that we've done in this area. The right to speedy redress is denied due to the current system limiting access and lack of presiding officers who offer sufficient expertise to make informed decisions. The battle against piracy is still being fought, with the task team working closely with the South African Police Services to identify innovative and sustainable strategies to address the problem. And when we speak about piracy, we're not talking about the people on the street corner who are selling the DVDs and videos and CDs and all of that. We actually are speaking about gentlemen and ladies who are wearing suits like me and you, who essentially are the ones who are the beneficiaries of piracy. So the small crooks around the corner, for me are actually the face of the giants behind the piracy that is actually happening in closed doors and factories. And I think those are the people whom we've said to the South African Police Services they need to be pouncing on. And I think that, so when we have that discussion later on, when we think about people who are pirating the work of artists, we need to stop thinking about those who are on the street corners only and actually start thinking about those who are running the actual machinery that supplies those who are on the street corners. The non-ratification of certain international treaties has caused non-recognition of moral and economic rights, the lack of digitization of the legislation and access to copyright works for the disabled communities of South Africa. Now, the Copyright Amendment Bill introduces a wide range of exceptions and limitations. An improved, effective collective management regime is recommended by the CRC report. The legislative provisions provide for the payment of royalties to related stakeholders, which includes writers of screenplays, actors, musicians, performers, and producers of content for the exploitation of cinematography, film, television, and radio shows. The bills provide for an obligation to pay royalties for the retransmission of these works, and it also provides for consequences in the event of the non-payment of such royalties. Now, what are some of the limitations in terms of rights? The Copyright Amendment Bill absolves librarians and archivists from liability for the bona fide use of works protected by copyright in rendering archival and librarian services. Now, I'm happy to obviously announce that we have come to this stage with regards to legislation. And I think those who have been part of, if I may refer to, part of the struggle to ensure that we make progress in this regard, are obviously also excited. It obviously took long for us to be where we are, but we're quite happy with the progress that has been made. And I hope that from now henceforth, I was having the discussion with the chair of the portfolio committee just now, that we will all try and push and ensure that this process is speedily concluded and that we have updated laws in terms of copyrights, but also laws that protects performers and artists and all the role players, because we see this industry as being central towards our economy and economic development. I think one of the it's an isolated case, but one of the painful stories in the most recent weeks was when one of the artists, Professor Pitika Ntuli, sent me a message saying that he thinks he should leave the country because he believes that elsewhere there are laws which will protect his work, but which will also ensure that his work becomes more beneficial. And the point he was making when I had a conversation with him was that he's not saying that he should be living in luxuries, but all that he wants is, beyond recognition of his work, is for him to be able to sustain his life, and for his work and art not to unduly benefit other people. And I suppose that's what all of us who are here in this room are yearning for. I suppose that's what our objectives are. And I wish you a successful engagement and discussion, but I also want to encourage you to, when the bill is before Parliament, that we all go and make submissions, because that's the only way in which our democracy can work, and that's also the only way in which the law can reflect the will of the people. So thank you very much for affording me this privilege.